I do not get along with machinery. Not in the usual I'm bad at technology sort of thing. I can work my phone and my computer fairly well, like I'm not completely incompetent. No, it's really just that I sometimes have really bad luck with certain appliances, and it doesn't help that I can be kind of accident prone. So I figured for this video, I would tell you some of the work horror stories that involve my mishaps with tech stuff, including the time I almost caught a gas station on fire by accident, because that's always fun. Hi there, and welcome back to the Pixie Art Show. I'm Pixie, and my favorite things to do are draw and tell stories. So that's what I do here. And I have quite a few ridiculous stories that sometimes feel like they've come straight out of a cartoon or something. But before I get into today's stories, I should probably take a minute to talk about what I'm drawing. I actually had a bit of trouble figuring out what I wanted to draw for this video, and since I don't draw fan art much anymore, I thought I'd do some Sailor Moon art in a sort of chibi-ish kind of take on my style. I also wanted to draw them all in their super forms, though I did make a tiny mistake and forgot to draw pleats in their skirts. I didn't look too hard at my reference, apparently. I had Pluto almost fully colored in before I noticed, so I did not go back to fix it. Sorry, I'll do better next time. Alrighty, so with that out of the way, let's get into it, shall we? Like I said in the beginning of this video, I'm not always great with machines or technology. There are times when the machines rise up against me like I'm Sarah Connor and they need to take me out, so Skynet can rule the world. I may have seen a few too many robot apocalypse movies. I also have a lot of anxiety over electricity in general. I've had some outlets spark at me, kind of, when I go to plug something in, and that always freaks me out. It doesn't happen often, and now that I'm an adult, it doesn't scare me quite as much as it used to. I would refuse to plug anything into any sparky outlet when I was a kid, and it was sometimes kind of a pain. Anyway, I guess I'll start off with the time I got stuck in the elevator at the hotel I worked at. I was hired while the place was still under construction, and we'd go in every day to clean and try to get the place up and running. That took a lot. About a month or two after I started, the elevators were finally turned on, and we were able to start using and cleaning them. Now, we had a lot of issues with the elevators, both just after they were turned on for the first time, and then even more issues after we actually opened the hotel. To be fair, the whole thing was kind of built with super cheap materials to cut costs, and it was a major rush job near the end. They had so many problems during the building process, and many more after it opened. But yeah, so anytime that we had a really busy day or two, and the elevators were run constantly all day and night, they would just break down, and we'd lose an elevator for a whole day, sometimes more, which sucks when you have to drag around a huge housekeeping cart. There were no service elevators. It was the same too for both guests and workers. Not great, but whatever. And I'm getting a bit sidetracked. That place still makes me so angry. Anyway, so the week that we got the elevators running for the first time, I was given the task to clean them, which basically meant I got to ride them up and down for a full 8-hour shift. Not a big deal, I'm not claustrophobic or anything, so I didn't really mind. It is really weird to spend a few hours riding those things, and then try to walk on solid ground, like talk about sea legs. Now, one thing about these elevators that I will mention, if they sit idle for a certain amount of time, the lights shut off, and they go into sleep mode. I didn't know that was a thing that happened. No one had mentioned it to me. So the first time it happened, it did freak me out a little bit. But all I had to do was push one of the buttons and it turned right back on. That's a fairly easy fix. That's something I can handle. Well, one of these days that I was cleaning this elevator, I was, of course, cleaning it again. They were almost entirely metal on the inside, and it got super dirty very quickly. And everyone was always smearing their fingerprints all over the walls in there. Anyway, so the elevator had, of course, been idle for a bit, and it went into sleep mode. I was startled briefly, but not concerned or anything. Except this time, pressing the buttons did nothing. I pressed just about every button, but it just would not do anything. No movement, no lights, nothing. And here's where I start to panic a little. And my panic is made worse by the fact that there is no cell service in the elevator. There were actually a lot of places in that building that had no cell service. So, of course, I can't text or call my supervisor to let her know that I am stuck in this elevator and, freaking out. It's about here that I start crying and really panicking. Now, there was an emergency call button in the elevator, but this was before the hotel was actually opened, and I'm pretty sure it wasn't actually set up at the time. And really, all they could have done for me was send somebody to fix the elevator, and that could have taken hours. I was kind of up the creek either way. I did eventually manage to get through to my supervisor, and somehow they got the elevator working again, and I was rescued. Yay! I flew off that elevator in a flurry of tears and hyperventilating, right into my supervisor's arms, and she just stood there hugging me and trying to calm me down. And I don't generally like being touched. I'm really not a hugger, so that just tells you how panicked I was. Funny enough, there wasn't even a problem with the elevator. Turns out that the maintenance guy for the elevators was there to work on the other elevator, and he needed to turn it up to properly work on it. Unfortunately, he turned off the wrong one, and so I got stuck in a completely off elevator for about 5 or 10 minutes. I hated those elevators for the remainder of my time there, and they were pretty sketchy. I'm pretty sure they're just waiting for their final destination moment. So I know that one wasn't so much the elevator's fault or my fault. It was the maintenance guy making a simple mistake, and I'm really not mad at him. Looking back on it now, it was pretty funny, and other people did actually end up getting stuck in the elevators when they were actually broken. So I was pretty lucky in my experience, and never got stuck on them again after. My next story is actually also from that hotel, and it involves 2 heavy-duty vacuum cleaners and some shady AF electrical outlets. I started at that hotel as a housekeeper, but when the workload of cleaning 16 rooms in just 8 hours got to be too much for me, I switched to a more regular janitorial role. The housekeepers cleaned the rooms and I cleaned the rest of the hotel, all the public areas and then some. One of my favorite things to do was vacuum the hallways, and I had use of 2 fairly heavy-duty vacuums. The ones we used for the rooms were cordless and pretty light, but these ones plug in and were probably about 15 pounds each. I mean, they were pretty solid. So one day while I was vacuuming the 4th floor, using one of the many questionable outlets, seriously, so many of them just didn't work at all, or it was really hard to plug anything into them. It was almost like there was something blocking or partially blocking the outlets. It was weird. Anyway, so I finish up this particular floor, and when I go to unplug the vacuum to go to the next floor, the little grounding peg that, keeps the thing grounded and protects against electrocution came right off the plug and was still embedded in the outlet. I actually have a photo of that, and I'll post it here on the screen somewhere for you. Now, my first instinct for some dumb reason was to just pull it out with my bare hands. I don't know why. I genuinely don't know why. I am not actually that dumb. What I did instead of that was take a photo of it, send it to my supervisor, who sent it to our head maintenance guy for the hotel, and he took care of it for me. Because he has tools for that, obviously. Like, I'm just a cleaner. I was a bit iffy about using that vacuum again without the grounding peg, so I switched to the other vacuum. It was identical to the other one in every way, except it still had its peg. At least it did until a few months later when I was vacuuming on the same floor. This time, pretty sure I was using the top part of that outlet. Now, it could have been a different one. Doesn't really matter. Either way, the exact same thing happened. I unplugged the vacuum, and the grounding peg is still in the outlet. So, of course, I have to go find the maintenance guy and tell him that it happened again. He was genuinely surprised and asked what was it with me and those vacuums, and I made a joke that I probably shouldn't be allowed to use those vacuums anymore, and we both had a good laugh. And then the rest of the time I was working there, I used those vacuums without those grounding pegs. I was a little concerned about it, especially since, like I said, a lot of the outlets in that building were shady as heck. But I never got electrocuted or anything, so I guess it all worked out. Now, those stories are pretty tame in terms of, having issues with technical stuff, and they don't quite hold a candle to the time I nearly burned down the gas station I worked at. Well, I say I nearly burned the store down, but in reality the fire was pretty small and there wasn't actually any danger to us or the store. We did handle it all very quickly. Though it could probably have been worse if I hadn't managed to find the problem that caused it. So you know how most convenience stores have like a bunch of different drink coolers for all the different brands of sodas or whatnot? A lot of different brands have their own that they put into stores, and this story involves one of those coolers. Not super important which one, it just happens to involve one. Something else I will mention is that this store also had a pretty serious mouse problem. I mean, we were forever finding them both alive and not alive. They had holes all over the store and were into everything. And so around the time of the fire, we started smelling this awful, rotten, fish-type smell that I just assumed was an expired mouse. The smell was hanging around the soda cooler in question, and I figured that a poor little mouse had gotten underneath it and got stuck somehow, and was, going bad. So I got the bright idea to take the plastic grate off the front of the cooler to check underneath and hopefully maybe get rid of the smell. It was that bad. The entire store reeked and I couldn't take it anymore. Not to mention customers were starting to complain about it too, so it was getting to be a problem. Luckily, I wasn't working alone, so I left my coworker up at the cash, grabbed one of the store's random screwdrivers, and I went to work unscrewing the grate. I had no problem getting the screws out, but when I tried to get the actual grate off is where the trouble started. So there were two groups of wires that poked out around the sides of the grate. And considering this cooler was pretty old at this point, one of those groups of wires was fraying quite a bit. I'm sure you can guess where this is going. When I moved the grate, it'd hit the wires and they would spark. And I do not like that. So I decided I would stop trying to take the grate off. I no longer cared about the smell. We could get somebody in at some point to take care of it instead. This was not part of my job description. Now, I probably should have just left it alone and made a note about the frayed wires. Maybe even unplug the machine. What I did, however, was try to screw the grate back on. And of course, in doing that, I jostled the wires, they sparked again, and this time, they caught fire. Actual flames shot up at me, and I just yelped and jumped back before turning to the front of the store to shout at my coworker to grab the fire extinguisher. Luckily, he was pretty quick to act, and in seconds, the fire was out, and the entire store was covered in yellow dust. That was, of course, my cue to immediately unplug the cooler. Then we opened up the doors so that we could air the store out and try to get some of that dust out. And then I texted our manager to let her know what happened and that we had to unplug the cooler. She was concerned, but also thought it was quite funny and was very happy to know that we were all okay. And we did handle the crisis pretty well, and nothing other than those wires was damaged. Here is the really good bit. After I unplugged the cooler, the smell went away. Like, it was almost immediate. Fun fact for you. Did you know that if you smell rotten fish around any electrical stuff, there's a good chance that you're about to have an electrical fire? So in reality, I didn't start the fire. I just found a potentially worse situation and prevented it from happening. I am genuinely glad that it happened at the time that it did, rather than have a customer brush up against those wires and a potentially worse situation. And yeah, that's the time I almost accidentally burned down a gas station, but not really, because the fire was going to happen anyway, and we put it out before it actually did anything. And that's the kind of luck I have with technology. The machines don't really like me. So how about you? Do you have any stories about machines fighting back? Let me know in the comments. And if you've made it to the end of the video, I want to thank you so much for watching. I'm genuinely glad to have you here. And if you want, you can check out my other socials. I'll have them all linked down below. I also recently made a new X or Twitter or whatever account, so that will also be down there. And that's all from me for now. Thanks again for watching, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you next time. Bye!